England was woked into defeat. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and I am recording this after the EuroCup final, in which England was defeated in the penalty shootout against Italy. Italy played fantastically through the whole tournament. Congratulations to them. But of course, England choked. And why did that happen? Well, the penalty shootout started well enough. The English captain got up and scored a goal. Eventually, the goalkeeper managed to fend one off from Italy, giving England a 1-0 advantage after 2 penalty shots each. At that point, the English manager, Gareth Southgate, sent in individuals who were not accomplished strikers. In fact, the most accomplished, Grealish, asked to take the penalty and was ignored in favour of 3 others, including one 19-year-old kid, Sarko, who had never taken a penalty before in his life. And there he is, he's sent against one of the greatest goalkeepers the world has ever seen, at Wembley Stadium in front of 100,000 fans, including the royal family. All the hopes of his nation on his shoulders, and unsurprisingly, the moment proved too much. Why was he there? And to answer that question, we really have to go back weeks and months to how this turned into not a game decision to put him in front of goal, but in fact, a political grift. Now, I'm going to be deeply critical of the Black Lives Matter movement in this video, and I'll do another video on the history of that movement, explaining more why. But if you are a supporter of BLM, please know that I'm not going to be attacking you personally. It has attracted a lot of good people, but by virtue of the fact that they have marketed themselves in a very nefarious way. Black Lives Matter sounds innocuous enough. Of course, Black Lives Matter. And if you're just taking those words and their individual meaning, then that's all well and good. And therefore, supporting Black lives is perfectly fine. Supporting any group of people and their right to life is a good idea. But imagine for a moment you had a group of child traffickers called the Don't Kick Puppy Society. And you suddenly point out and you're like, these people are trafficking children and kidnapping them from their parents and sending them to God knows where else for all kinds of, terrible abuses. Perhaps it's a bad thing. And then imagine the pile-on from the media and from critics and from activists saying, you hate puppies. You're criticizing the Don't Kick Puppy Society. And you're like, no. I'm criticizing what they actually do. And Black Lives Matter is a Marxist hate group. Just the other day, they came out publicly to criticize the American government for what's going on in Cuba. And for those that don't know, Cubans in the tens of thousands have taken to the streets to protest against the communist dictatorship, the Castros, who have been in power in Cuba since 1959. They've shut down the entire internet across the country, and yet the BLM movement has come out publicly in favor of the Castros and criticizing the United States. They have previously publicly criticized Israel, taking the side of the Palestinians. They did that within the UK. And they expressed a high degree of anti-Semitism. That one of the founders of the BLM movement has taken the millions and millions of dollars given to the organization and bought herself a series of mansions. The BLM group is kind of what's happened to feminism. You sort of say, well, you take the word feminism and you go, feminism just means I believe in equality between the sexes. And you go, okay, but the behavior of some feminists doesn't seem to indicate that, which is why so many people who absolutely believe in equality between the sexes wouldn't choose to call themselves a feminist. And for that reason, of course, I believe in, supporting Black lives across the gamut spectrum, of the vicissitudes that group experiences. And yet, I would never support a movement that behaves the way BLM does. And yet, Gareth Southgate had the entire English team wear Black Lives Matter shirts, take the knee in front of booing crowds, and has insisted resolutely, despite overwhelming opposition from many parts of the sporting culture, that things should not be politicised, that this is a necessary reckoning for the UK. Now remember, BLM came from what happened in the United States. The UK has no history of black slavery. The UK doesn't have, significant amounts of black violence. The UK was the nation that abolished the slave trade by the force of its Royal Navy worldwide. And yet, they're the ones who are being forced into this virtue signal. And there's also a broader principle at play as to whether or not a sporting national team should be forced to do any political gesture of any kind. For example, in 1938, the English sporting team was forced to give the Nazi salute when they were playing in Germany, and they were asked to do that by their own managers. And I think that could be considered a significant black mark on the history of that team. And I think future generations will judge BLM very harshly and look back on what Gareth Southgate has been pushing with the same degree of dismay. So back to this penalty shootout. Well, the three penalty takers all have something in common. They were the three black players on the team. When England was on the cusp of victory in a penalty shootout that would have brought home this glorious achievement for their nation, the manager of the English team put the virtue signal of diversity before his actual job of winning the match. And the reason he did this is because he had hoped that by scoring this penalty, the winning penalties in the tournament, there would be a wall-to-wall media coverage about the glory of English diversity and how critical it is to support black lives because they are now the national heroes. Now we know what happened. They all failed, and it wasn't their fault. They were not supposed to be put in that position in the first place. There were people better and more qualified to do the job, but Gareth Southgate's personal crusade to basically denigrate all English fans as xenophobic bigots ruled the day. I woke the next day and saw that the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, future King of England, had sent out a tweet. And I'll read it to you. Quote, "I am sickened by the racist abuse aimed at England players after last night's match. It is totally unacceptable that players have to endure this abhorrent behaviour. It must stop now, and all those involved should be held accountable. W." When I read that, I was like, oh my goodness, like something profound has happened that has required the intervention of the royal family themselves to attack the people of England, right? And so I turned on the TV expecting the first thing to see is Nazi flag parades down Birmingham. Like I was just overwhelmed by thinking, oh my goodness, something terrible must have happened in the wake of this, and I was going through the process of how this would occur, obviously national disappointment, millions of people drunk and angry, perhaps things went terribly wrong, and there was massive riots, race riots. I couldn't find anything. I saw thousands of people tweeting to say, racism against those players is outrageous, should never happen. But I saw no evidence, none, that the racism itself had occurred. And I was thinking, okay, maybe I've just not getting the right information, that they might be doing a media blackout on this, they might not be reporting on it because they don't want to martyr people or anything like that. Well, no. About a day or so later, after the major left-wing outlets who were desperate to prove racism started publishing their findings. Well, it turns out that after the match, 44 tweets were identified as being racist against those three players, out of 545,000 messages. 44. Of those, the vast majority, over 75%, were from outside of the UK, mostly from the Middle East. But there's also Instagram. There were millions of Instagram messages aimed at those players after the match. And of those, around 140 were racist. So 140 messages out of millions, of which five messages were from the UK. In other words, there had been no actual racist abuse against those players at all. No major event had come out of nowhere to justify this response. What happened was Gareth Southgate, having absolutely backfired, betraying his country, losing out on his diversity signal, costing the cup for England, ran to the royal family and said, "Oh my goodness, you would not believe the racist abuse that is falling upon these players after they're missing the penalty. And you should really get out there and show some leadership against this." Now, beyond misleading and abusing the royal prerogative, I could see why Prince William would fall for this. He has been experiencing a high degree of very unfair, must be said, abuse when it comes to so-called racism towards Meghan Markle. If you think about the interview with Oprah, where there was a strong implication that the royals were all racists, and being hypersensitive to that criticism after all this publicity, it's not surprising that Prince William would see this as an opportunity to show real leadership on this issue, but in fact was done so under false pretenses. So not only is Gareth Southgate a failure as an English manager, and not only is his crusade against racism in the UK completely ill-founded, and the BLM taking the knee unnecessarily divisive, he misled the royal family, taking advantage of the natural sensitivity they have on this issue to exploit this. And so when the Prince of the United Kingdom comes out and says there's all this racist abuse, the ordinary person, including myself, was like, "Oh my goodness, we can't allow this to happen. We have to respond." There is a high degree of trust in that institution. And if we think how rarely the Queen of England ever interferes with politics generally, that's the tone of the royal family, if you like. You would only expect this to happen in the case of, a major war, a terrorist attack, not something that was basically an ideological grift. So in the end, England lost the Euro Cup final. They did so exclusively because of Gareth Southgate's incompetence and belief in diversity virtue. And more than that, I'd just say that the UK is not a racist country. If you compare the English team in its diversity compared to all the other soccer teams that exist around the world, all the African teams, you don't have many white players in the African teams. You don't have many South Asian players in the Mediterranean teams or anything like that. This is purely an artificial assault on Middle England. And it is Gareth Southgate and the BLM protesters that have injected race into this whole issue. I mean, Gareth Southgate chose strikers in a critical penalty shootout, not on the basis of skill, but on the basis of race. He's the one who has injected race into this. England, not being a racist country, being forced to prostrate itself through this ritual of taking in the knee, where most Brits will take the knee for two reasons: before the Queen and before their wives, right? That's it. And by injecting race in this way and creating this division, it has made people believe that race is an issue when it hadn't actually previously been thus. So Gareth Southgate needs to take full responsibility, not just of failing in his job, but also for injecting this division into British life, misleading the royal family, and I think no amount of condemnation is going to be quite sufficient for what he's done to that country. That's my view. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on this. You may absolutely disagree with me. Leave them down below. One thing that I'm absolutely delighted by is, Australian team would never ever take the knee.
No, I'm not. Here he is. So this is all the cricketers taking the knee.
Mother